In a previous video, we went through most of the flagship smartphone SoCs on the market, but since then, things are changing a little bit. We've got two new contenders here, the two best flagship chips right now in 2023, Apple's A16 and Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Gen 2. And I know you guys are really excited about these two, about their raw performance and power efficiency, and I can tell you this is going to be very interesting this year. So let's just waste no time and dive into the question you all want to know: who is the best smartphone chip on the market? In case you don't know, at GCON we review smartphone chips in a very different way. We barely talk about feeling, we only do the real test. We sometimes do regular tests you're all familiar with, like battery life or gaming performance, but we also have the one thing we're really proud of: power efficiency curve. Long story short, we test the performance and the power consumption simultaneously while measuring not only the peak, but also at lower clock speed or in power saving mode. And then we draw the curve and show you the power efficiency of every single platform. More efficient chips will appear at the upper left corner. We've actually explained these things in detail in our previous video, so make sure you watch that before stepping to today's topic. And since then, we've actually updated a method, improved the precision of our data, so all the results you see today will be more accurate than before. Before we jump into any test, let's briefly go through the architecture, the design of those two buddies. Let's see what kind of change has made in terms of CPU design. Qualcomm makes some huge changes on their chip this year. In Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 CPU, we found 4 types of cores. That is, 1 Cortex-X3 Prime Core, 2 A715 Performance Core, 2 A710 Performance Core, and then 3 A15 Efficiency Core. This is such an unprecedented design because in today's smartphone world, we're getting used to the typical layout of 1 plus 3 plus 4, which is how Snapdragon 8 Plus did. Technically speaking, replacing an E-core with a P-core will definitely improve the multi-core performance, but I'm wondering how they would keep the power consumption under control. Also, it's kind of weird to see 2 different types of P-cores in one SoC. The newer A715 dropped the 32-bit support, so technically it should be more efficient. Besides core design, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 also upgraded its cache design. We finally got a fully spec out 8MB of level 3 cache, just like their competitor MediaTek. The Adreno GPU also received a major upgrade. It's now called Adreno 740. They've massively scaled up the GPU while reducing the clock speed to only 680 MHz. This might provide decent performance while maintaining reasonable power consumption. We'll definitely check that out later. In terms of new features, Qualcomm added hardware ray tracing to this new GPU. This is not the first mobile chip doing that, but the demo really looks promising. I know this is not going to be on your phone anytime soon, but well, we got something to expect at least. Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 also shows huge improvements on the AI unit, and the most important thing is it's made by TSMC 4nm process, so no Samsung bullshit. Very good, huh? Overall, it seems like they're really pushing the envelope this year. So Qualcomm is getting wild on their new flagship. However, Apple's move on their chip are rather conservative. First of all, the CPU core design receives minor upgrade on A16, 2 performance core called Everest, and 4 efficiency core called Thortus. It is also made by TSMC 4nm process, which is slightly better than A15. And comparing with A15, A16 got a larger level 2 cache here for the P cores, growing from 6 MB per core to 8 MB per core. This could potentially help the P core performance. The SLC system-level cache on A16 actually got smaller than A15. Is this a downgrade? Well, I wouldn't really say that because first, we have a larger level 2 cache on P-core, and second, A16 is using LPDDR5 6400 memory, resulting in a 50% increase in memory bandwidth. Those two advantages could somehow offset the smaller SLC capacity. So our CPU is fine with this. Plus, smaller SLC also means more area for CPU, so as you can see, both P-core and E-core in A16 got noticeably larger. And we also receive a higher peak clock speed. This big boy here can boost up to 3.46 GHz. So at least on paper, the CPU of A16 does provide some improvements. But GPU-wise, there's literally no difference between A15 and A16, which is really disappointing. To make things worse, shrinking the size of SoC is not a friendly move for GPU. We might even see a decrease in performance because of that. So I'm really worried about how A16 will perform in our test. Maybe it's time to check everything out. First, let's talk about CPU. Here in the CPU test, A16 is located right here, and Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is right here. We don't have the full curve for A16 because no jailbreak, but we've got 2 points with the power saving mode off and on. Well, it seems like Apple is taking the lead once again this year in terms of CPU. A16 still provides decent CPU performance, and it is still the most efficient CPU on the market. But the improvement looks pale. Just look at their previous results. Their A14 did this, and then A15 did this. Well, that's what we call a fair upgrade. And this year, A16 did this. That definitely doesn't sound right, huh? Especially on the lower clock speed, A16 is barely better than A15. I mean, they upgraded to a new CPU design. They utilized the new, better 4nm process, and all we get is this little tiny improvement? Weird, right? And since they overclocked the chip, although the peak performance seems a lot better, it is impossible to maintain because the skyrocketed 11 watt of power consumption. I don't know whether Apple is waiting for their competitor to catch up. If that's the case, that is so nice of them. Then let's take a look at Qualcomm. In terms of power efficiency, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is about the same as last year's A15 on peak range, while fails behind A15 at lower frequency. They're still not the best, but as you can see, they're catching up really fast. I mean, look at their last gen chip, the Snapdragon 8 Plus, located right here. Do you even realize that 8 Plus was released only 6 months ago? This is quite an improvement over half a year. And if you compare 8 Gen 2 with the notorious 8 Gen 1, which is only 1 year old, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 absolutely smashed out of it on power efficiency. It's almost 4 years of gap between them. I know they previously suffered from Samsung's fabrication, but dude, that's a huge upgrade in only 1 year. Another interesting thing I spotted is Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is actually more efficient than MediaTek's new flagship, Dimensity 9200. If you look at the core design, the 9200 isn't inferior at all, utilizing ARM's new architecture, the Cortex-X3 and A715. So why would they lose the battle against Qualcomm? To find out more, we need to spend a bit more time discovering single-core power efficiency of those CPUs. It turns out ARM's CPU design once again underperformed. Here, as you can see, Cortex-X3, the prime core on 8 Gen 2, has some improvement over the Cortex-X2 on the last gen A+. Not huge, but still noticeable. However, the A715, the performance core, the middle core of 8 Gen 2, isn't getting much better than A710 on A+. Well, A710 is already a pretty poor design, lacking behind A78 on power efficiency. So unfortunately, the A715 on 8 Gen 2 is not getting anywhere better than the 2-year-old veteran A78. And we can say these new chips really didn't benefit much from ARM's new architecture. I guess you must be confusing right now. If it's not ARM's design, then why would Qualcomm still delivers proper improvements on Snapdragon 8 Gen 2? What exactly makes 8 Gen 2 more efficient? The answer is the extra performance core. That might sound a bit unintuitive. I mean, more P-cores means more power consumption, isn't it, right? Well, here is how it works. If you have more CPU cores, you can simply run at a lower frequency and deliver the same performance as a higher frequency, less core CPU. And you might consume less power by doing this. Let me elaborate this way. Here we tested the power efficiency of 3 P-cores against 4 P-cores. As we can see, on mid to high clock speed, 4 cores absolutely smashed 3 cores in efficiency. If we have a mid-level load, let's say right here, 4 cores can handle it at the same performance while using 1 less watt of power. Pretty impressive, right? However, when you're looking at lower frequency, that advantage on core count is getting smaller, and 3 cores will finally outperform 4 cores under 1.2 GHz right here. But at this point, it doesn't really matter anymore because your phone is not generating much heat anymore. So, like what we saw before, swapping an E core for an extra P core is quite a smart move. Not only it solved the long-lasting thermal problem on Snapdragon, it also improved the peak performance. That's why, despite ARM's lackluster performance, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 still did a good job on CPU. Okay, at this point we can say that after Apple lying flat on their A16, Snapdragon are about 1 generation behind Apple on CPU. Considering how large the gap between them about over 3 generations, I think Qualcomm is definitely working really hard to catch up. And I have to say, this is an excellent strike back. Keep it going, Qualcomm, maybe you can catch them next year. So without a doubt, Apple is still dominating the leaderboard of CPU. But for the GPU, well, this is getting interesting. In terms of peak performance, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 got about 30% better than A16 and 30% better than its predecessor, A+. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. More performance means more power consumption, right? No! This is pure efficiency gain. All 3 chips here are consuming about the same amount of power, while Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 absolutely kills A16 and A+ on performance. This is a solid win for Qualcomm. Well, this raw GPU power won't improve your gaming experience by a lot because most of the mobile games are bottlenecked by CPU. Your GPU usually running at maybe mid to low frequency, so again, we should take a look at the GPU power efficiency curve here. When those chips takes about 3 watts, the 8 Gen 2 platform performs about the same as A16, while not as efficient as A15. Yes, you hear me right, on GPU power efficiency, A16 is even worse than its predecessor A15. What a joke is that? The peak performance is not getting anywhere better as well. This is truly a shame on Apple. I believe this is because they didn't change the GPU design at all, while the new LPDDR5 RAM might have an impact on power consumption. So at least for GPU, Qualcomm finally outperformed Apple, showing us some crazy results. Actually, you know what? This Adreno 740 GPU is even on par with a GTX 1050, a desktop entry-level graphics card, if we run 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme on both of them. Just imagine a GTX 1050 in your phone that only consumes 8 watts of power at peak. That's really impressive, huh? Right now, you should have an idea about how efficient those chips really are, but how different are they in real-life applications? I think it's time to find out. One of the benefits of being power efficient is longer battery life. To show you exactly how long your phone lasts, we designed a battery test cycle for a smartphone. This 1-hour cycle includes text messaging, voice and video call, content consuming text, video, TikTok, and then gaming. And it will cycle again and again until the battery dies. That might sound like a very hard test to do, but don't worry, I can assure you no one gets depressed during the test because we built a robot for it. This little guy here will execute every single action at the exact moment as we want it, and it will never get tired. Here are the results of our battery tests. Looks like our theory isn't wrong. As we said before, the new iPhone 14 Pro series based on the A16 is not improving its power efficiency. Just look at iPhone 14 Pro Max and iPhone 13 Pro Max, where their battery size and screen size are pretty much identical. The new 14 Pro Max brings us 8 more minutes, which is definitely not a huge improvement, I would say. Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, on the other hand, improves a lot. Xiaomi 13 Pro, although didn't beat iPhone 14 Pro Max, still lasts 2 more hours than its predecessor. And the smaller Xiaomi 13 even surpassed iPhone on this list. This is some superb battery life. The thing is, Android phone makers tend to put larger battery into their phones in order to overcome the weakness of chips and tuning. And since Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 does provide decent efficiency, it's not so hard anymore to reach the battery life of iPhone's Pro Max variants. That's definitely a good news for Team Android. Besides battery life, power efficiency could also have a huge impact on gaming. Maybe it's time to see how those flagship platforms run games. The game we tested is Genshin Impact. This is a high-demanding open-world title with stunning graphics made by Unity engine. Although you might think this beautiful showcase relies heavily on GPU, Genshin Impact is actually a CPU bottlenecked game on these flagship phones due to its driver overhead. Well, before the test begins, I still have several things to clarify. To keep all the graphic settings identical on both Android and iOS, we carefully checked every setting and used a comparable setting here, which is Android version's highest preset on both platforms. Still, the rendering resolution is a bit different on those phones, but it won't be a big deal. Besides that, we also designed a really power-hungry test road, basically high-speed moving in Summer City, so it is way more demanding than standstill. Okay, let's look at the results right here. First, let's check out how iPhone performs. Looks like the two new A16-based Pro iPhones didn't really improve their frame rate in Genshin Impact. The initial 10 minutes looks fine, with both iPhones running at a solid 60 FPS. But after 10 minutes, we thought throttling kicks in, and both iPhones dropped their frame rate to mid-50s. To be honest, this result is quite disappointing, especially when you're comparing them to a 15-based iPhone 14 and 14 Plus. The two standard models even outperformed those Pro iPhones. Can you imagine that? And to make things more embarrassing, both A16-based Pro iPhones actually consume more power despite delivering lower frame rate. How weird is that? I mean, I paid extra money for the Pro, right? So obviously, A16 didn't really meet our expectation here. Yet you can argue it is still some reasonable performance since A15 is already a beast. And what about Qualcomm? We did the same test on Snapdragon phones and the result is quite surprising. Both Xiaomi 13 and 13 Pro delivers frame rate close to 60 FPS, although not quite stable. But luckily, they didn't experience throttling like iPhone did, so the average frame rate over 30 minutes is actually higher than iPhone's. And you know what? Xiaomi didn't even unleash the full power of Snapdragon Gen2. This boy here, the Red Magic 8 Pro, a dedicated gaming phone, actually runs like this. A straight as hell, solid 60 FPS with only minor dips here and there, which has nothing to do with the hardware performance. Wow, that's pretty stunning. It might sound like Team Android smashes iPhone to the ground this time, but listen to me, it's not that easy, because when we check the power numbers, iPhone is still more efficient than Snapdragon, even with no improvement this year. But on the bright side, these Gen2 players still improves a lot comparing to last gen. Here we can see Xiaomi 13 consuming way less power for comparable frame rate and the Red Magic 8 Pro using same amount of power, delivering crazy performance. The thing is, despite their super efficient chips and metal API, iPhone sucks at thermal management. The chassis of iPhone simply couldn't handle too much heat, while Android phone makers build solid thermal capacity by putting vapor chambers and other cooling stuff into their phones. And that's why flagships powered by Snapdragon Gen2 outperforms iPhone in Genshin Impact despite being less power efficient. We also tested their body temperature while running games. It seems like they all have identical peak temperature when playing Genshin Impact, though I found the heat tends to distribute it more evenly on Android flagships. Like I said, Android flagships loves vapor chamber. Okay, that is our standard Genshin Impact test. But I feel like we're missing something here. I mean, Snapdragon Gen2 got a super impressive GPU with desktop-level energy inside. But when we are playing Genshin Impact, even with all the settings tops out, you're still running under 720p res. So this beefy GPU merely shows itself, right? Well, at GeekerWan, we love to take things further. And you know what? We actually unlocked this Xiaomi 13 Pro, gained its root access, which means we can do anything on it. So in this little app called GFX Tool, you can scale the rendering resolution of any game, including our old friend Genshin Impact. After some tweaking around, we can set the game to a native 1440p, matching the 1440p screen on this Xiaomi 13 Pro. And again, we f***ed the MIUI thermal to unleash the full potential of this chip. Remember that, right? Now, let's launch the game. And here we have 60 frames per second under 1440p. Every single pixel is individually rendered on this glorious screen, and that is just astonishing. I really would like to call it playable, but right now the phone is consuming over 12 watts of power. We had to put the phone directly on the top of the fan to keep it from burning my hands. Still, considering the performance we got, it's really impressive. However, 1440p is not like the end of the world, right? What I want to do is burn it down to hell. How about 4K? Yeah, 4K gaming on a smartphone, how's that sound like? Come on, let's push it to the max, and here we go. And guess what? It works! Now the game is running at a solid 30-ish FPS. Not bad, huh? It's playable at 4K. I have to say, this performance is already better than numbers of notebooks, even way better than the PS4 console. Despite we only have a 1440p screen here, the graphic is still noticeably better. Look at it! Just zoom in and zoom in, look at the face, the hair, the texture of her dress, and everything is so crystal clear and detailed, and that is what I call desktop-level gaming performance. More than that, we also tried Switch emulation on Red Magic 8 Pro. With the help of this ridiculous GPU, we can even achieve 40 to 50 FPS in super demanding games like The Witcher 3. Achieving that on a smartphone? That's just unbelievable. Alright, that is enough playing around, and here is how I would conclude the SoC fight this year. Apple, the industry leader, are still topping the leaderboard of CPU despite they barely improved anything on A16. While Qualcomm, on the other hand, brings us some huge surprise, not only closing the gap on CPU very fast, they even made a monster GPU that outperformed iPhone. Along with the great thermal design of Android OEMs, we finally observe a better gaming experience on Android flagships. And that means Team Android can now put some real pressure on Apple this year. So that brings to the end of today's video, and I hope you feel helpful after watching it. And if you like it, please hit the like button, and subscribe to our channel would be awesome. Thanks for watching, see you next time.